Friday, January 30th, 2026. Welcome to Make It Make Sense. I'm Grant Herms. Today on the show, we are talking about the ways in which the Department of Homeland Security and ICE have changed from their original mission. And I know that I've talked a lot about this, certainly in the last 6 months and certainly in the last few weeks, and really since we've seen this massive ramping up of violence and aggressiveness from ICE in Minneapolis in particular. But my guest today is Steve Cash. He is the executive director of the Steady State, a group of almost 400 former and some current national intelligence community experts and high-ranking officials who have come together to oppose what's been happening as the United States is sliding into authoritarianism. And they say that because a lot of these people have worked in places on behalf of the United States that are already dictatorships or authoritarian states. And so Steve and I talk about what they're seeing happening this time inside the U.S. and that they've sort of turned their collective knowledge and powers internally to take a look at what's happening here in America and what's troubling them most about what they've been seeing. Steve also was among the staffers who helped write the law that invented DHS after 9/11. So he's been there from the beginning. He left for a little while, and then he came back as the senior advisor to intelligence and analysis at DHS. So this guy knows what he's talking about, what we're risking by not having it operate the way that it was designed. It is a really fascinating conversation with somebody who's got some pretty deep insight from the inside of how this part of the American government works. Before we get to that, make sure you're following or subscribe to the show wherever you listen to your podcast. Sign up for the Make It Make Sense Substack, where this morning, thankfully, I just dropped that brand new piece all about the insane, upsetting distraction that is ICE at the Olympic Games, where I talked to several former Team USA members, and you'll hear a little bit more from Steve about what he thinks the purpose of having ICE on the ground in Milan Cortina actually is. But to get that, you have to be a paid subscriber. It's just $5 a month. And as always, share the show on social media. It's MIMS News Pod. It's MIMS News Pod, all one word on every platform. I am at Grant Herms on Twitter and Blue Sky, and at Grant Herms TV on everything else. All right, let's get to my conversation with Steve Cash. Does coffee make you anxious, sweaty, unfocused, or maybe your doctor thinks you have a crippling caffeine addiction, which I am definitely not in any way referencing for my personal life? Let me turn you on to Mantra Matcha. Mantra Matcha is ceremonial-grade matcha from a private hillside in Uji, Japan. Smooth, naturally sweet, and it gives you this calm, focused energy without the jitters. It's packed with antioxidants like more than 130 times more than regular green tea, so you feel energized and you feel good. Now, the matcha flavor isn't for everybody, but good news, Mantra has 6 infused flavors like banana cacao, strawberry lemon, cinnamon goji berry, and rosehip dragon fruit, which sounds like a name from Game of Thrones, but it's delicious. Plus, every box you buy helps provide a meal to a child through the No Kid Hungry program, which we love. Now, right now, listeners to Make It Make Sense can go to mantramatcha.com and use the code MIMS25 for 15% off. Now, that code also supports Make It Make Sense with a commission. That's how these things work. I got to legally tell you. But the good news is you'll help the show, you'll stay caffeinated, and maybe not too much. Again, that code at mantramatcha.com is MIMS25 for 15% off. Mantra Matcha, less chaos, more clarity, 2 things we could all use a little bit of right now. All right, let's get on with the show. Steve, thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure. It's good to be here.
So tell me about who Steady State is, because before we started rolling here, I was under the impression that you guys are kind of new, but that's not the case. You answer the call and then you go to sleep for a little while, as you put it, then you come back and answer the call again. So who is Steady State?
Well, I'll tell you who it is right now, and then I'll give you a little bit of the backstory. Right now, we're around 380 formers. I'll put air quotes around formers. What I mean by that are people mostly retired, but not everybody, from the national security community. What do I mean by national security community? The 3-letter agencies that make up the intelligence community, the State Department making up the diplomatic community, and then a smattering of people from sort of other parts that help America's national security, congressional oversight, Department of Defense, places like that. But historically, we started all the way back in 2016. Donald Trump is elected. A number of us had already left the government. At that point, it was around 100 people at the beginning. They were mostly CIA people and State Department people. And we had known each other because we had worked together when the Balkans crises were taking place during the Clinton administration, and we aged out of working. I was actually still working. And we liked each other. We had worked well together, and we were really concerned. Donald Trump appeared to be not competent to be commander and president-in-chief. Now, I don't think we thought he was that dangerous, other than the danger of somebody who didn't know what they were doing. And so we decided we needed to do something. Now, I'm going to take a little digression here. Your listeners may not know this, but American national security people, particularly in the intelligence community, take it very seriously that we should not be anywhere near domestic politics. When we get involved in domestic politics, and I mean we, the profession, intel officers, we're the baddies. You don't want us anywhere near it. So we generally wouldn't get involved at all, but this seemed important. So what could we do? Well, why don't we do what we've done in the past? Let's sort of pretend we still work for the federal government, offer our help. And we did, and it was ignored. And then we started hearing rumors of blacklists, and that scared people. We were already not comfortable with the whole proposition, and we just sort of stopped doing anything. So, we had a mailing list. We weren't really officially, I don't even know if we were called the Steady State back then. And then the Ukraine scandal broke.
In Trump's first term, you mean? The scandal in Trump's first term?
Many of us had worked the old Iron Curtain lane, former Soviet, the Balkans, Hungary, Czechoslovakia, now the Slovak Republic and the Czech Republic. So this was our home territory here, including Ukraine, and it felt very different. This was not an argument about policy or even competence. This seemed to be an existential threat to the structure of American democracy. And then we had to balance that against our normal antipathy about getting involved in domestic politics. And we thought it was important enough we had to get involved. Now, we didn't bring some of our toolkit with us. Those of us who come out of the spy world, and that's, the spooks among us, and I'm a former ops officer, headquarters-based ops officer for CIA. We didn't do any of that stuff. We did what you do when you're an advocacy group. We wrote, we spoke, we went on panels. It was COVID time, so we just looked into television screens. And we endorsed candidates, eventually endorsing Joe Biden for president. And then he wins. Existential threat vanquished. And I'm pleased to say that your, spook types and diplomatic types who don't think we should be involved in domestic policy said, existential threat gone, so are we. And we went back to sleep. The organization still stayed largely social, maybe educational, did get a little bit involved in the 2024 go-around, but I don't think anybody took all that seriously the proposition that Donald Trump would return. I, just from I went back into government because I'm a glutton for punishment and can't keep away from mission. And I went to the Department of Homeland Security, where I was senior advisor to the Undersecretary for Intelligence. And in fact, worked on the intelligence enterprise of the department, including ICE and Customs and Border Protection. Partly because, and I'm again digressing a little bit, partly because of the very thing I sort of started with. We are very aware in the U.S. intelligence community how dangerous we can be. We spend a lot of time worrying about that. Our history runs back to the experience during the Second World War, which largely was Nazis and then the Soviets. So we know how dangerous intel can be, particularly domestic-focused intel. And I&A, intelligence and analysis, at the department is exactly that. In my view, it's one of the more important and interesting intellectual problems in intelligence management, in the policy of intelligence. So I wanted to work there. And I thought the undersecretary was great. Ken Weinstein, a Republican. He had been George Bush's Homeland Security advisor. I had been Senator Dianne Feinstein's chief counsel. We actually negotiated some of parts of the Homeland Security Act. And I thought he was a great guy. I want to work for this person. And I liked him a lot. I resigned on the 20th because when I learned, I saw what was happening. I actually told my boss I was resigning, I think on November 5th. because I could not work for a president who'd run on a platform that was now explicit. I'm going to use the instruments of state power, the intel services, the police, the FBI, to get my enemies. That scared me. And once again, the existential threat was back. The steady state reformed, and now it's over 380 members. Same basic division, and we're doing all the things we did the first time around. Writing, speaking, talking. Podcasts exists and are part of our life. People like you. Back in 2020, we knew what podcasts were, but, they were still a little fringy. They're not anymore. So we're spending, ironically, no COVID, but we're back on our computer screens all the time. And we're going to endorse candidates. And we are writing and speaking with even more urgency. And I'll tell you about a few of the things we're doing. But we're really worried. This is as much danger as America has been in my lifetime, and probably my parents' lifetime and my grandparents' lifetime. I think you'd have to go back to the Civil War to see a time when the structure of American democracy under a constitution with rule of law, was in such grave danger. And I don't know if we're going to get out of it.
There's sort of a working theory that I shouldn't say, there's sort of a working principle for the show here, Make It Make Sense. That is, when experts like you tell us that the United States is backsliding away from democracy into these dangerous places in which you have worked, in which members of Steady State are, as you said, alum of the Iron Curtain, right? The communications secretary, undersecretary to the whatever people, right? It's those folks.
Yep.
It behooves us to believe those people.
Sure.
If you were economists and you were talking about inflation, nobody would bat an eye. But now it's because you're not those people. I think people have a hard time wrapping their minds around something like what you just said. How do you try to explain to people that that's not hyperbole or exaggeration or, the sky is falling, but real intelligence and analysis?
Well, a few ways. First of all, I appreciate what you're saying about being an expert, but I'm going to say, don't listen to me just because I tell you I work for the CIA. Right? What we tell people is push us and focus on what we're saying, but also what we're writing. And then I will explain to you why you should believe us. So you touched on some of us. We come from an experience base that we spent most of our lives looking at autocrats, tyrants, and dictators, sometimes working alongside them. So we sort of know how it works. Second thing is, our profession, our trade is actually looking at these things and then describing them in a way that, to the best that we can, eliminates bias and politicization. So what we would call tradecraft, and you probably heard that word. On the ops side, tradecraft is the stuff you see in movies, like how to recruit spies and do it securely. So communications, secret communications, all that kind of stuff. But we use the word across the board. So there's also something called analytic tradecraft, and it is what professional intelligence analysts, and we got a whole bunch of them, do for a living. And it's structured way of thinking about things, writing about things, making sure you don't end up with groupthink or influenced by the people you're talking to. And then most importantly, we don't only talk, we write. So if you go on our website, you're going to see two documents that I would recommend to your readers. Before you decide that, that Steve Cash knows what he's talking about, I like it sounds right to me, read our stuff. And the most important one, it's under the resources page, key documents, and it was all over our social media. There's something called the National Intelligence Estimate. It's the most formal intelligence finished product. And a finished product is a term of art. It means a written product written by analysts using all that tradecraft, usually for one of our statutory customers, which are the President, Joint Chiefs of Staff, combatant commanders, secretaries of cabinets and departments in the Congress. That's who we write for. Well, not anymore. We're not writing for the president. We'll talk about that a little bit. We're actually writing for you and your listeners.
Yeah.
That changes things. And we don't have access to classified information. Okay. That changes things. And for the first time, we're not writing about foreign people or foreign institutions or foreign countries. We're writing about us. And so we sat down and did that. We had talked about an existential threat, but now we put our analysts to the test. Write about it. And write about it the way you would have written for the president 5 years ago, 10 years ago, whenever you were doing this. So I encourage your readers, take a look at it. The second document is an update. We just did it 2 weeks ago, and we're going to be doing it every month. It's an odd, somewhat formal writing style, but it lays it out for you. So you're going to be able to see and test us. And we put all this stuff up on social media, and we encourage people to ask us questions, argue about it. That's fine. And because it's out there in the public domain, you can argue about it yourselves. And we hope journalists will and podcasters will. So that's why you should listen to us. Not just because I tell you I have experience and the people I'm working with. And our people, I mean, they really do. We have, I'm guessing, probably 36 chiefs of station and probably 4 or 5 dozen ambassadors.
Yeah.
So these are not people with just a bit of experience. It's hundreds and hundreds of years of collective experience at the very top of the national security establishment. But don't go by that. Read the stuff.
Yeah, which I have, and it's fascinating to me.
Yeah.
And lays out a compelling argument that I want to go over here. But I want to ask you first, before we get into that, how difficult is that for you and for the folks at Steady State to treat the United States like a country that isn't their own? That would strike me as people who have spent their lives serving this nation, to treat it as something that it's not feels like a kind of a hard task.
Technically, not such a hard task.
Sure.
You're people in the intelligence community. They come in one day and they say, "Hey, you've been working on Poland. Guess what? You need to start focusing on Argentina." And you say, "Yes, sir," or "Yes, ma'am."
Right.
Happy to be reassigned. What really did make it hard is it's unbelievably painful.
Yeah.
Emotionally painful. Writing. I mean, we've seen what happens overseas. We've seen how horrible it is. It's not like the movies. It's worse. And we've all experienced it in one form or another, but always over there. It wasn't our kids. It wasn't our parents. It wasn't our neighbors. It wasn't you or me. It was them.
Mm-hmm.
So emotionally, it's been very, very difficult. And I can tell you, during my time in the national security community, I loved what I did, and I think it was important. I never thought we were going to be on the losing side of whatever conflict we were involved with. I was very confident that America was going to do just fine. I worked terrorism for a bunch of years. I never thought that the terrorists were going to win.
Right.
We were going to win. It was a question of how and how fast.
Yeah.
This is different. We may lose, and that's scary. And it also is very difficult to be, most of us have served in places one time or traveled in places where we were worried about our physical safety, worried about what could happen, but never at home. And we're worried now. And it's disorienting, disheartening, and saddening all at once.
I think that's how most people have felt in the last, year, certainly in the last 6 months, and certainly in the last 4 days after the killing of Alex Preddy in Minneapolis this weekend. And that seems to be, now we could talk about this too, but a turning point a little bit for quite a few people. But let's talk about this latest update to the national assessment that you guys have put out.
Mm-hmm.
What's in that? And walk me through this.
Well, let me start with the methodology. And we decided to use a technique that comes out of Cold War analytic tradecraft, which now goes under the initials, because we have to have an acronym for everything. I and W, indicators and warning. And it used to be, people realized that if what our customer wants to know is, are the Russians going to attack? That was sort of what we were focused on. What would we see before that would let you know they were likely to attack? So, for instance, would they be moving a lot of gasoline around to tanks, or would they be going up or down on their radio comms? And the Russians did the same thing to us. And I'll give you an example. And it may be apocryphal. I don't know if this is true or not. But the Russians apparently had thought that if the Americans were gearing up to attack, first strike, or start a conflict, they'd be working late, and Americans need their pizza. And so there would be a lot of pizza orders to the Pentagon and to the White House complex. And supposedly they actually recruited assets to warn them if suddenly there was a lot of late night pizza ordering, because that would have let them know.
Like some guy at a Domino's off, like on K Street.
I guess
like
so. I don't know if Domino's existed back then, but exactly that.
I mean, I will say, as a
So
journalist, we use that scale for when we know what congressional are
yeah,
debates are getting heated, is how many pizzas the staffers are ordering. So yeah.
I figured it would be familiar to you. So we used that technique and we said, listen, we've seen and we've reported on this before overseas. What do you see happen when a democracy is becoming a dictatorship or when a dictator is trying to hold power? And you see a couple of indicators. And when I say a couple, around 5 or 6 boxes, bins that we would put them in. So, for instance, you would almost always see that the dictator or want to be dictator is going to push on the rule of law systems, the legal profession and the courts. Second, you're going to see them push on the other parts of the government that could limit their ability to unilaterally work, such as the legislature. You're going to see them push on the institutions of civil society that question them. And there's 2 of them that are particularly important. One of them I'm looking at right now, which is the media, and the other is academia. And last, nearest and dearest to us as former professional intel people, is you turn to what we would call overseas in countries ruled by tyrants, the security services. So you got a bunch of people who have a lot of skills in lying, cheating, and stealing, as well as the use of violence and weaponry. So it's your army, it's your police forces, it's your intelligence services, and you turn them inwards. They no longer protect the country; they protect and enhance your power. We're seeing all 6 of those indicators, bright and shining. And we could walk through, but I think your listeners are all going to have heard of this. And we can start Minneapolis. What we saw in Minneapolis is what we've seen in Serbia, in Russia, in any number of countries that are falling into autocracy or are trying to preserve an autocracy. A paramilitary force deployed at home, not really bound by the rules of either war or criminal justice, but directed and acting as if the guiding force is preservation of power and crushing of dissent and ensuring that people are afraid. Because that, for many of these indicators, the ultimate goal is to keep people afraid, confused, and docile and ignorant. And that's why they don't like you.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, they did call me deranged at one point. DHS did this year, so that was fun. Yeah.
And that's what you call, and worse, people who are trying to explain reality, because dictators don't like truth and reality. Not for any deep moral reason. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying, oh, truth is a wonderful thing. We need truth. Truth is not compatible with effective despotism.
Yeah.
It's just not good for business. Journalists are not good for business. Academics, not good for business. A docile and effective internal security service, that's good for business. So we're seeing all these things. And if you read our paper, it has an executive summary. I got to confess, it's 23 pages long. So if your readers want to look at it, you can get a lot out of that first 2 pages.
It's worth the full 23. It's worth the whole thing, you guys.
It is worth it. If you go through it, you'll see that it explains what are we seeing, and the update does the same thing. And most of them went up in urgency. Now we are seeing some pushback, and that's a good thing. And I hope that our next one in a month or so will reflect that, because we are starting to see more civil society organization. We're starting to see the media push back. We're starting to see more and more people using the courts effectively to protect rights, all of which a dictator and the Trump administration really opposes. That's what we're seeing happen now.
When you've seen these things in other countries, how long do those pushbacks hold out? Are we ready to see a real form of pushback here, as certainly as we get closer to the midterms? Or do autocrats tend to be able to pivot? They find scapegoats quickly. I'm thinking right now about someone like Gregory Bovino or even Kristi Noem, who some senators have, and the House, Democrats in the House have already said they'd like to impeach. How do those things work practically?
Well, here it's hard to make the comparison. We have a very different system with much more robust and well-entrenched procedures and processes that are designed to prevent tyranny. So let's put that aside for a second. Overseas, look, Franco in Spain for decades. Slobodan Milosevic controlled Serbia for almost a decade, a little bit more. Putin seems to have been there and will be there for quite some time. And before him, the sort of Stalinist and before it Leninist regime with, I mean, we're talking 60 years. Other places, it all happens and collapses very, very quickly. And for instance, when Milosevic collapsed, it all took place in around a year. A little bit more than a year, when there really started to be a coalescence and then an overthrow of his regime. Here in the United States, it's a little different, where we have a long tradition of effective democracy and peaceful transition of power. So some of the muscle memory is there. So I don't know how long it could take. Certainly it's going to take through the midterms. Right. The midterm for us is a structural inflection point that is so deeply ingrained that is likely to be meaningful either way. And either way, I mean negatively too. I mean, I think it's entirely possible that we'll see the elections either canceled or rendered meaningless in terms of a free and fair election. That's very possible, in which case the trend will continue towards authoritarianism, but that still will be an inflection point.
I've spoken to other people on this show, including recently an anthropologist who's also the head of the UN's Genocide Council, who studies MAGA as a movement through an anthropological lens. And he was saying that after Trump, because there will be after Trump, that this falls apart, that this regime can't actually function without him. It will be like the death of Stalin in a way. Is that the kind of analysis you're getting from this as well, or is that not really the case?
Again, we don't know. And the Soviet Union didn't collapse with the death of Stalin. Right. It continued for another 30 years. So a little bit more, I think. So if the death of Stalin is what you're looking for, we could end up with, 40 years from now, Vladimir Putin, or whatever.
Right.
Trump great-grandkid is Vladimir Putin. So I don't know. Now, the counter argument, and he may be right, is that we do have a long history of representative democracy under rule of law. You're not having to invent things. And that was one of the problems that when the Soviet Union fell, when, for instance, the wall came down, when Poland fell, these were places that didn't know how to run a democracy or anything. They didn't forget rule of law. They, in many ways, didn't have law. So if you were going to have for instance, move to a market economy and you have no contract law, how do you buy and sell real estate? Like, who the hell knows? So we have all that stuff. We have to use your profession, we got a bunch of journalism schools and we have a bunch of journalists. It's not like you're all going to be dead, we hope. You'll do your job. We have we have hundreds of high-quality academic institutions which are accustomed to performing as free academic institutions. So we have some tremendous advantages over some of these other areas. If I had a bet, I think your anthropologist is probably right, that if it all falls apart, we will be able to rebuild what we knew before under a Biden, Obama, Bush,
right,
and continue.
Business as
Carter,
usual,
Reagan.
right? Repeat that.
Business as usual. Now there's going to be calls for structural change. I get asked about this a lot. Why aren't you focused on what are we going to do after? And we wrote an essay about this, I don't know, probably 3 months ago. Churchill had 3 major points of Churchill during the war. So first one, which is where I think we are, is the fight on the beaches speech. Later, there's the speech with we're not at the end of the beginning, but we're not at the beginning of the end, but at least the end of the beginning. Okay, glimmer of light. And then there's Yalta. Okay, we're a year out from winning the war, but we're already planning the post-war world. we're nowhere near Yalta. We're probably fighting on the beaches now. That's the place to think about it. And there's two reasons why we've advanced that. One is just sort of time management. You only have so much brain space, and this is exhausting. If we're going to be planning out the post-Trump years when we're still not sure what we're doing in the Trump years, we don't have the mind space for that. But more importantly, in order to succeed here, people ask me, what do we need? What are the things we need to succeed in preventing authoritarianism? And one of them is going to be the various segments of American society that ordinarily, in normal times, within the framework of democracy, are at each other's throats. Democracy is a messy project of yelling, screaming, and fighting. It's sometimes can be very frustrating. So there are a whole bunch of policy issues that we're going to have to, and we have confronted in the past, and we'll have to confront again. The role of money in elections, climate change, Israel-Palestine, what do we do about systemic racism and how much of it exists? Blah, blah. I can go on and on. A million different issues in which we line up as Americans, often in a constellation kind of thing, a little kaleidoscopic constellation, and we scream at each other. If we start talking about what to do afterwards, we're going to end up screaming at each other, which is exactly what the Trump and his people want. That's why the focus, for instance, on Israel and Palestine, because you can't fight against Trump if you're fighting against people who disagree with you on Israel or Palestine. Right. So I hesitate to talk about the after, which your anthropologist sort of invites. I prefer to leave it at, I'm optimistic there will be an after, and I'm looking forward to having arguments about what it should look like.
I want to zoom into DHS and ICE here a little bit because, I mean, you've got some inside baseball. You've got experience in this department. I'm going to go out on a limb here and say that this current DHS looks almost nothing like the DHS that you worked in.
Yep. From the get-go. So we'll start with, all the faces are different. The so-called deep state, and yes, we are named slightly as a pun on the deep state, all the people who just sort of spend their lives, and I'm one of them, happily in harness to do the thing professionally that we're equipped to do in service of the United States. Presidents come and go, policies come and go, they're gone. If I walk the halls, I mean, I live 2 miles from where I worked, in the Nebraska Avenue complex in Upper Northwest. It's where I worked. I'm pretty sure if I walked the halls of that right now, I would recognize almost nobody, and almost nobody would recognize me. So it's been a year. They're all gone. So it looks very different. It's also acting very different. So, and let me take you back on a little bit of history here. When DHS was created, we had things scared out of us, I don't want to have to be beeped out. And there was a belief that we needed to bring some efficiencies to how we dealt with external threats, particularly from terrorists. And so we created this mega agency by bringing in pieces of a lot of other agencies. So all of these parts of DHS existed someplace else. We formed almost nothing new except for INA, where I worked. We created a new element of the intelligence community whose job was to provide intelligence to a new set of customers, state and local officials with Homeland Security responsibilities, and ensure sharing of information from places we never had to share before, which is the information that came from state and local law enforcement primarily, with the federal side. So it was sort of a clearinghouse. And to the extent we did intelligence analysis, it was to write a product for a new set of customers that we hadn't really served before. Everything else was old and put together. And, I was a Hill staffer at the time. I worked on the bill. And there was both sides of the aisle. People were very much aware we were doing something dangerous. We were creating this mega agency, which is going to have a lot of, weight behind it. 4 or 5 different law enforcement organizations were going to be melded into one. So there were some deliberate inefficiencies built in. The components, for instance, kept their identity. They kept being Senate confirmed independently. So that was sort of deliberate. We didn't want to become what we had seen overseas in more despotic countries, which is the Ministry of Interior. Now, I know that's not exactly fair to some of our allies who also have a Ministry of Interior. There are only so many names you can come up with. Um, but for many of us, Ministry of Interior was a sort of joking shorthand to mean basically the FSB in Russia. We didn't want that. So we built in those inefficiencies. And then we built in a few other things. One, internal guardrails. That's the phrase everybody uses. So hot and cold running lawyers, inspector general, privacy and civil liberties units, a couple of different ones. In INA, we had something called the Transparency and Oversight Program Office. All kinds of oversight, internal and external. The Privacy and Civil Liberty Board outside of the department. 5 or 10 different committees that did oversight, and pretty aggressively. GAO, and a very aggressive media that asked us lots and lots of questions and did lots of investigations. And we got some stuff wrong, no question about it. But the general effect was, if you sat in the conference room of INA, and I sometimes wish we could let reporters just sit in there. Contrary to what a lot of Americans thought when they thought badly of us, that we're sitting around like twirling our mustaches and figuring out how to invade people's civil liberties, we spent a huge amount of time and effort. Like, can we do this? Should we do this? How can we do this safely? Will this infringe on someone's constitutional rights? Is this a good idea? So if you get a job there, if you're coming in senior, you're getting that job. And this is in Bush and Obama and Biden. If you're coming in senior, they've picked you for that. If you're coming in junior, it's beaten into you from day one, in the way it was in the intelligence community. We talk about it all the time. One of my jobs was to give a little lecture to the brand new people, literally the day sometimes they'd gotten their badges and told where to park and where the bathrooms are. My basic speech was, take a look at the pictures of Mussolini on the balcony. You can imagine behind him, there's sort of shadowy figures. One of them's the army. The other one's the domestic intelligence service. That's where you're going to work. And your whole job, the most important part of your job, is you never want to be putting anybody on a balcony or keeping them there. Never forget where you're working. And everybody was cool with me giving that lecture. And that's where it is. And by the way, that goes all the way back. Quick story. When I joined the agency in 1994, you go through a process called EOD, enter on duty. You fill out your forms and crap like that. You get all kinds of different little immediate training, including where the bathrooms are. And you're in there's probably 60 people when I went through. I don't remember exactly how. And they're coming into all the parts of the agency. And you're in this auditorium, which is CIA at Langley is called the Bubble, because it's this very sort of cool building that looks like a bubble. So you're in this audience, and in comes what at the time looked to me like this old, hard-bitten guy who probably was younger than I am now, so that scares me. And he was a case officer who'd been everywhere and done everything. And I'm now going to talk to you. And he opens up and he says something along the following lines to all of us. Right now in Moscow, they're having a meeting just like this for the new inductees into at the time it was the SVR, the interchange to the SVR. And they're going to go off and they're going to get training pretty much like you are. Those of you who are going to be operators, they're going to learn how to do surveillance detection routes. So are you. It's the same thing, just in Russian. Those of you who are going to be analysts, they're going to learn that analytic tradecraft, but it's going to be in Russian. Pretty much the same thing. So are they your colleagues? And there's dead silence. No, but first of all, we were all scared of him. But there's like, what? And how do I answer that? And nobody says anything. And then he lets that sit for a while. And he says, let me tell you, they are not your colleagues, because you are going to care most about upholding the Constitution and the law and protecting America's system of governance. Their job is to protect the leader. You are not their colleagues. You happen to share some professional characteristics, but you're not. And that's day one. And it never stopped at CIA. We're not seeing that at DHS anymore. The new DHS is, what can I do? What do I have the capability to do? If I have the capability, I want to do it. And they're not about protecting the homeland from foreign. They are about protecting Donald Trump from dissent. They're about elevating Donald Trump. They're about making sure that Plan 2025 is carried out. So it's a very, very different place.
Is it safe to say that DHS is a rogue agency either against the American people at this point, or at the very least against its own founding mission?
I hesitate to use the word
Yeah.
rogue because that seems to just imply sort of a maverick who runs away from the herd. No, they're right alongside the so-called Department of War and HHS and all the other ones. So they're not rogue, but they are not what the American people voted for and their representatives voted for when they were established. That's why I was, the phrase that I've been using, they are turning into the Ministry of Interior. Exactly what we feared. They are no longer the Department of Homeland Security. They're the Ministry of Interior in all of its functions. And that's why they've assembled the paramilitary force, which is not what ICE was and not what CBP was.
How do these things get interrupted then? How do we stop DHS from becoming a full, Ministry of the Interior then? How does this work?
Well, you go back to those indicators and you reverse them. What are the indicators that you think are being destroyed, and then use them and keep them from being destroyed? So let's start with the most immediate one probably, which is our courts. We have courts to decide whether things are lawful or legal or following the Constitution. We need to use them, which means not only the judges, but the legal profession. That's why Trump went after the legal profession. So we're going to have to use that tool. We're also going to have to use the tool of those two elements that I talked about that are educatory.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure that's a word.
Is now.
But it should be, which it is now, which is you guys. So we need to listen. One of the jokes we have is like, for people ask me all the time, what do Americans need to do to push back? It's sort of your question. I say the first thing is, and this is a little bit of a joke, is get smart. We have it even as a hashtag. But Americans need to learn how the system works and how it's being destroyed so they can preserve it. And, it's unfortunate we got rid of civil, the basic high school civics classes. Most Americans don't know this. And it's not just us. I mean, we come from a particular area of the government that most Americans have no idea how it works other than what they see in the movies. But we need to learn about things like the Anti-Deficiency Act or the Appropriations Clause, which once upon a time you probably would have learned in high school, but we don't anymore. So Americans need to get smart. Second thing they need to do is, and using those places where the indicators are, they need to use those tools. And the key one is the voting. And that was one of the things I didn't touch on, which is the destruction of a view that voting works and is legitimate. And that's the other thing that Donald Trump's been so good at. He's convinced Americans that voting really, maybe democracy doesn't work because we can't really do elections. And it's not fair. That's where we're going. The other thing we're going to have to do is, I mentioned this already, is make those alliances. We're going to have to talk to people that we don't like, and we don't like what their views are, and we're going to have to link arms with them, sometimes hold our noses, and make common cause. When we're seeing it over the last couple of days, which I think is actually sort of hilarious, which is a whole bunch of organizations that don't like the Second Amendment organizations seem to be on the same page. And here's my fear: when now is not the time to talk about what would responsible gun regulation look like. I don't want to have this argument with the NRA right now or with people who want to ban guns. The one thing we do agree on is you shouldn't be shooting people because you think they may have a gun and they were mean to you, and then you get to execute them. So we need to push on that. So that's how you push back on both DHS and the larger slide towards authoritarianism that we're seeing. DHS is a tool. The security services, the Ministry of Interior, is just a tool. It's not the cause. And that, I get a lot of people who say, what the real problem is the Patriot Act, or DHS. And my pushback is on the Patriot Act. I worked on the Patriot Act. I always say, look, what part of the Patriot Act don't you like? I never get an answer to that one. But if you think that the problem here is the Patriot Act or the Department of Homeland Security, you're missing the point. The problem is that we elected Donald Trump to be president, and he's occupying the presidency, and he has the powers of Article 2. And unless we restrain that, you can't blame DHS. No more than you can blame HHS for measles outbreaks. It's not really the department's fault. It's the people who are running the department and the policies they're adopting, which are the result of an election.
This would be a good time to plug the Things You Forgot from Civics Class newsletter that I put out every Monday, where I go through all the civics lessons that everyone should have learned or didn't learn or whatever, didn't pay attention to in high school. And the most recent one was about the consent of the governed. What does that mean? That was this week's on Monday. So I'm going to plug myself there. Right now, there's a growing popularity for abolish ICE and abolish DHS, rebuild it from the ground up, or break it back apart and give it back to the original agencies. In what you just said there, I'm going to guess that that's not your view of this.
Maybe we should, but I don't want, first of all, as a practical matter, we can't do any of that stuff. So it's sort of an academic exercise. So like, if I controlled both houses of Congress and I was president of the United States, what would I do? Great. And maybe I would devolve and in some cases replace. I don't know. The problem with saying abolish ICE is that gets you to the, okay, so who's going to enforce an immigration law?
Mm-hmm.
And to even think about answering that question, you need to know a lot about how the government works and immigration law works, which most Americans don't.
Right.
And I've had this argument with you, like, let's abolish ICE. And I say, so who do you want to enforce immigration laws? I don't know. Right. Justice Department. And I say, you do know that ICE used to be INS, or part of it, in the Department of Justice.
Yeah.
So I think it's premature, and also from a political point of view, foolish to be sort of echoing the old defund the police. And I understand that people who said defund the police or abolish ICE, I think in most cases are not saying open borders and no law enforcement. They're saying reform, but we can't reform because we are not controlling this country right now. And so the fundamental fallacy is to ignore the fact that we do not have a functioning democracy. So arguing about what the policy should be when you don't have control of policy in any way, shape, or form is premature.
Last two questions I have here aren't directly related almost at all to what we're talking about. ICE is going to be on the ground at the Olympics.
Yeah,
as a part of in Milan. Is that a normal thing? And the image that ICE is now projecting globally, then, is that a problem for security services broadly?
It's insane. First of all, it's not a normal thing. It's insulting to our allies on like 15 different levels. First of all, the idea that we're in another sovereign country. But so before you start telling people, I'm going to be putting down my paramilitary force, you sort of usually would want to ask them and do it in a diplomatic way. Second, they have no experience in security. They're not, there are a lot of things they're not good at. Pretty much everything they're not good at least the new guys. The old guys were very good at being a civil enforcement of immigration law. They're like, they have no competence. I mean, this is like, saying, we'll also send a bunch of forest rangers to protect the athletes, or something like that. It makes no sense at all. And I have no idea why they came up with it. My guess is because it's part of the sort of fascination with the militarization and them becoming a paramilitary. I think in the eyes of Trump himself and people around him, they look really cool in their kit. Mm-hmm. They got the helmets and the little light on the helmet and the whole thing. It's very cool. And of course, the Italians would love for us to send our cool outfitted soldiers. Not the Italians.
They would love us to go cosplay Call of Duty for them over there in Milan.
That's exactly right. It makes no sense at all. And I don't understand why they're even proposing it.
Yeah.
Not clear they can legally do it either, by the way.
Agreed. And I have not been able to get DHS or ICE to answer me on that question either.
Right.
The last question I have for you, Have you been watching ponies on Peacock right now at
I-
all?
No, I am so bad. I watch nothing about my profession on TV. I've not watched 24. I have not watched Slow Horses. Everybody tells me I have to, and I never do.
Slow Horses is excellent. I really like The Diplomat on Netflix
I hear
too.
it's fabulous.
It feels, from what I understand, with the people in at least the diplomatic corps that I've talked to, it feels the most real.
That's what I'm told.
Most because it's the most chaotic and frustrating
Yeah.
version of it. But Ponies is very fun. I think you'd like it.
Okay, I'll at least check it out. I did like West. I'm a big West Wing fan.
Who isn't? Who
yeah.
isn't?
Um,
Well, Steve, thank you so much
It's
for being
pleasure.
here. I really appreciate the time, man. Thank you.
Thank you.
I want to thank Steve again for coming on the show. If you want to learn more about the Steady State or subscribe to them, they're on Substack. You can also find that massive national assessment that they did. It's really interesting. And if you've got the time and inclination to do it, I really suggest that you check it out. You can find links to those things in the show notes. And that is it for today's episode. Please rate or review the show wherever you get your podcasts. Like and subscribe, and leave a comment below if you're a watcher on YouTube. Subscribe to the Make It Make Sense Substack, and as always, share the show on social media. It's Mims News Pod. That's MIMS News Pod, all one word, on every platform. I am at Grant Herms on Twitter and Blue Sky, and at Grant_Herms on everything else. Thank you so much for listening today. I'm Grant Herms, and I'll talk to you next week.